The earliest disappointment and embarrassment that we have seen so far in the playoffs look no further but the Miami Heat, who just got swept by the Milwaukee Bucks, who they just beat in 5 just a year ago and making the finals, where they just now ended up getting first rounded just like that, getting blown out on their home court in 2 straight games. So what went wrong? What's up, everyone? It's your boy Tista coming back. Finally, it's my summer break now, so I could get to produce more NBA content. And what better time in the postseason? So, if you're checking in here for the first time, I would really appreciate if you hit a like or a subscribe. It is so common, really common, to hop on social media, especially on Twitter, and to see the ginormous amount of slander being thrown at the Heat's way right now. From memes about them being the bubble guppies or bubble frauds, or their season last year being a bubble fluke. Everything is being tossed around them just to invalidate what they did last year because of how they stank it up in the playoffs this year. But in my opinion, as bad as they played recently in this season, I think it's really unfair to invalidate and to diminish what they have done in the bubble last year. What they've done last year was nothing short of legendary. Going into playoffs without any amount of expectation, let alone to make the finals and push the Lakers 6 games with their best players being Jimmy and Bam. Looking back at it now, you could say that's a very incredible feat. And just because they lost the way they did now, doesn't mean that their bubble season last year and the way that they came in there wasn't tremendous or anything. It's kind of unfair to do that. It's just like looking at like a rookie who won Rookie of the Year and seeing him slumping in his sophomore season and trying to take away what he did in his rookie year. Of course, it has no correlation at all. It's kind of the same scenario. But moving aside and looking into the 4 games they played this year, holy cow, it is such a different story from how they handled the Bucks last year, because they didn't handle the Bucks at all as they got handled by the Bucks. With me pushing that notion right there, it is very well for me to transition into what I'm about to say now, and that is that the team peaked last season. Pretty much everybody, like as we've seen, they all regressed. Okay, all of them either stagnated or had a decline of play. Well, first we're gonna look at their 2 All-Stars. Well, last season, because they did get that recognition in this year's All-Star game, as Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo just got the Giannis treatment. They pretty much got the taste of their own medicine in this playoff series. What they did to Giannis last year was pretty much flipped all across them. It just seemed like they forgot how to shoot, and that is such a major problem, because when you look at Jimmy Butler last season, especially in the finals, he was the driving force of the offense. He seemed so unfazed and unstoppable at times. He even went on like one-man runs. I think there were points in Game 5 when he looked like the next Michael Jordan. That was how unbelievable he was. Going from that to what happened just in this series, how he shot so atrociously, it's kind of sad to see. And not to mention, there's Bam on the other hand, who got straight limited. They had no respect for his jump shot at all. They were sagging off of him all the time. They were forcing him into mid-range shots, which I'm kind of surprised, because last year as well, he wasn't even a terrible shooter. He was a pretty respectable one. It just really seemed like their 2 stars forgot how to shoot, and that is a major problem. Coupled with the fact that there isn't any 5-star or high-regard playmaker in the team. There isn't no Chris Paul or LeBron level type of playmaker. And with that, you could already imagine how horrible the spacing and the play calling would be. And the team just looked all out of sorts. They just looked like they were lost in the sauce. And don't even get me started with the role players. Guys who are supposed to make big time trays, like of course Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson. They went from being called the next Splash Bros to can't even make a single tree, can't even buy themselves a bucket. that's the price you pay when you try to look at your young core and expect a lot from them, and you miss out on very great trade opportunities, which we will get to later. We all know what happened with the Harden deal and the fiasco that went down. But aside from that, losing Jay Crowder was really, really unheraldly slept upon in such a negative way. It impacted the team more than it seemed to impact them in the naked eye. It really did, because Crowder was that one scrappy 3 and D guy who just provided a lot of spark on both sides of the floor last year. Not saying that he's been great this season and this postseason as well, because he's also had his fair share of struggles. But still, with how Crowder played last year and to see how he filled in the void, that's pretty much one of the major gaps that they were not able to address this postseason against the Bucks. Because we look at guys like Iguodala and Trevor Ariza, of course, being veterans, they should provide more than just the tangibles in the game, and I'm pretty sure they did. But it's very obvious, and it's a no-brainer to say that they didn't provide, or they didn't fill up the rift that was left due to the horrendous shooting and due to them the Heat being picked apart on the Bucks offensive side. It's also a major problem that the Heat just stayed relatively the same. Of course, they got guys like Oladipo, they got role players like Bielitsa, Dwayne Dedman, of course Trevor Ariza, and Iguodala, who's on his second year now. But they got guys like that, but are they really that drastic of an upgrade or a shift from what we've seen from them last season? I think what's the major problem of the Heat this year was that they became too predictable. Of course, the Bucks faced them last year, and Budenholzer might have flipped just the game planning and the play calling and the way they just imposed tactics and schemes to stop the Heat offense, which was very, very effective. You look at the Sixers; they got way better. They surrounded shooters around Ben Simmons and Embiid, and they are thriving right now. You look at Brooklyn; we don't even need to start with Brooklyn. They got one of the top 10 players in the league, and Milwaukee, who added Drew Holiday, guys like Drew Holiday and PJ Tucker, who just lit it up this series. Comparing that to what the Heat was able to acquire, that's like nothing. That's like comparing a piece of gold to a piece of diamond. Oh well. Isn't it time to address the elephant in the room, which is James Harden? I will admit, at first I was very skeptical about James Harden's fit in the Heat, especially since they overachieved, as we know, last season. I thought to myself, maybe he would have disrupted the flow of chemistry, or even the familiarity of the teammates with one another. But obviously, looking back, we could say that Pat Riley's negligence was a big no-no, because you look at Butler and Bam, they weren't able to provide top-notch scoring. And what does Harden do? That's obviously, being an offensive phenom. And he's also a very underrated playmaker, so he would have provided spacing. Would have made life way easier for Bam and Butler. And most of all, I think the Bucks' defensive game planning was surrounded around taking advantage and exploiting the Heat's inability to make perimeter shots, or to make even mid-range shots, so they just sag off of them. Harden would have been a game changer in that regard. But as much as it is the Heat's lackluster postseason play, we could accredit this just beating to what Milwaukee was able to improve on. First of all, Giannis, aside from Game 1, his efficiency was very, very tremendous. And this could be factored in and indebted to how the team as a whole was able to shoot the basketball and was able to make at such a high clip. Drew Holiday and PJ Tucker, they are just so pivotal in the series. They did more than I think what anyone even thinks until now. Like, you think they are such important pieces? No, they're probably even more important than you think. But how they were able to defend just any one of the primary scores of the Heat, they were able to make them sort of, ineffective at all. They weren't able to get anything off of it. This may be attributed to Tucker's and Holiday's high defensive IQ, how they do not let themselves get beat in the defense, and how they stay in front of their man. But most importantly and most vitally is their playoff expertise. It played in very well into this Bucks team, which seemingly gets even buffer and buffer as the time goes. Of course, they're going to be puffing their chest with the unheralded role players that stepped up in these 4 games. You look at Brook Lopez, you look at Brent Forbes, Bobby Portis. They just were role-playing monsters. Okay, they provided a lot of scoring, a lot of production, more than what they were expected to do, and I'm pretty sure they're going to get such big paydays. Of course, Brook Lopez, his time in the defense will get a lot easier by sagging off of Bam. And of course, you know, Brook is one of those centers, one of those bigs who could stretch out the floor. So that's very important. That's very important to take note of, since, you know, Giannis is the main cog which drives the engine. And Brent Forbes, who's like a reincarnation of Steph Curry. Look at Bobby Portis as well, another stretch big. And I think that is one of the things that isn't really been conversed about, with how they have 5s who could still relatively defend and who could space out the floor. That's the most important part. Another thing which could be said as a scapegoat is that the Heat were unhealthy for the most part of this whole season due to, you know, COVID and just the weird circumstances that the season in its entirety was under. But I don't buy it being a scapegoat. I don't buy the excuse whatsoever, because you look at season injuries, you look across the whole league, all teams were banged up. All of them had nicks and bruises. How does the Heat have a single bit of an advantage or disadvantage when they're just pretty much in an equal playing field? Of course, Oladipo would have provided a lot of help, a lot of productivity into the playoffs, but I don't really think he's gonna make such a drastic change. Maybe he would have pushed this series into 5, but there's still no way. With how the Bucks and the Heat played, there's no way that Oladipo would have been a tidal wave type of factor. Aside from how the Heat simply got outclassed and outplayed in terms of skill and game planning, you gotta look at and think about what their probable mentality was in this season compared to how they were in the bubble. It just seemed like they didn't really have that same chip on their shoulder as compared to around August or September of last year. Of course, we know that Butler activated his so-called playoff mode, and I really don't know why he isn't getting as much heat as Paul George got back in 2018, and even up till now for calling himself playoff B. I really think that Butler should have gotten the same rough treatment right now. He should be getting a lot of heat for, you know, just like talking and just being a no-show in this series. I'm not a Jimmy Butler hater in any way. I just feel like if he would have played well, if he would have been his bubble mode, if you would say, the Heat might have stood a chance. And more importantly, that Jimmy Butler leadership, which we saw last year, is very infectious. Did we really see it this season, this postseason? I'm not quite sure, and I am uncertain of that. Seeing UD, the OG number 40, throw a chair right at court in the middle of a timeout, that's when I knew that things and the signs across Heat Nation was pretty bad. There might be some stuff going on in the locker room that we don't know, but either way, they simply got outbeat and outmatched in mind, skill, and spirit. So what is the blueprint of restructuring and recalibrating for the Heat moving forward? So the first major quandary they're going to find themselves stuck in is that they essentially have no draft picks. I don't think all hope is lost though, as you know, Miami in itself is a very attractive free agent market, and with that, I'm not really certain and I'm not confident that any of the big name free agents this summer were to make a very solidified impact on this team and turn them into a legitimate title contender, unless the Mavs handle the Clippers and given if Kawhi dips out of that player option, then Miami might find itself breathing with some new sense of hope, new sense of light and positivity, because when you add Kawhi into the mix, you get an elite shooter, a very good defender, and someone who is very consistent in the offensive end, something that the Heat lacked this year. But that is a what if. That is if Luka handles the business, and without that imaginary scenario in mind, we gotta look at the actual probable free agents. Looking at DeMar, Kyle Lowry, or maybe Lonzo Ball. I still don't think, even as solid as they all are, they're enough to get the Heat over the hump. I really think that they really are begging for a solidified first option scorer, not just a Jimmy Butler who has good games and off games. You cannot really afford that in the playoffs. You need a go-to scorer. No excuses. So what's next for guys like Bam or Tyler Hero? Because you may look at other players or pieces like Duncan Robinson, Trevor Ariza, Iguodala, more names like that down the roster. They might be good as gone, but those two foundational young pieces, as much as they underwhelmed and they regressed this year in the postseason, they still have a lot of room to learn. Maybe they don't have the same appeal or ceiling as they did like a few months ago in the bubble last year, but not everything is all dark and gloomy, because they got a full training camp, full off season, and who knows, maybe they could just tune out the outside noise and they're gonna get back to their pre-2021 season selves. With that, it's also possible that, how as intriguing and fascinating Pat Riley's mind operates, you cannot be surprised if you see a major trade go down in South Beach. With that being said, I would like to extend my thanks and appreciation for those who have watched till the end of this video. I will be uploading more content more consistently, since it is playoff season, the most wonderful time of the basketball calendar. With that, if you enjoyed this little commentary, I would really appreciate a like and a subscribe. This is your boy Tista, and I'll catch you in the next one.